Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hannah. We talk about books, chronic illness, knitting and life in Amsterdam. Subscribe if you're new. I would love to have you. I've got a bit of a casual, completely unplanned book video for you because I realised I have not been wrapping up the books I've been reading this year so far because honestly it's been a little slow going. I don't know why I'm so out of breath. I just haven't really found my stride, I would say. I've read some really great books, but a lot of middle of the road books, and I just haven't really, I can't recall really finding a streak of like more than a couple of weeks at a time. I think it's hard because definitely in the past 6 to 8 months, my joy and love for knitting has skyrocketed, and a lot of my time is spent knitting now, which was time that I'd previously spent reading. I am trying to audiobook while I knit instead of watching YouTube just to fit in both hobbies. But if you're a hyphen hobby person, if you have multiple hobbies, let me know how you manage it, because it's like reading has lost its shimmer a little bit for me. I know when the weather warms up and I'm sort of on summer holidays and I'm reading on my balcony, like it maybe will become a little more enticing again. Sorry, I really need a pillow for my back. But for now, it's been a slow start to the year, which is fine. But I thought I would just run you through every book I've read so far with some reviews I have longer than others. Probably this is completely unscripted and unplanned, so I'm probably going to be mostly unedited. So forgive me if I ramble a little. But on the 1st of January, I finished Land of Delusion, Out on the Edge with the Crackpots, Conspiracy Mongers Remaking Our Shared Reality by Colin Dickey. I finished this on a long night flight on the way back from Thailand from our Christmas holiday, and it's one of those scribbed or Everand now original non-fiction books, which I've had really hit and miss with. It's short, it's like only a couple of hours on audio. I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person, but this one didn't really add anything new that I remember. Not a single thing I can recall to you about it, so obviously couldn't have been that good. Then I finished on the 5th of Jan, The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus by Emma Knight, which I know I did speak to you about in a vlog earlier in the winter. I absolutely loved this. Murder mystery kind of family secret vibe set in Scotland at the university, and then also in a like bit of a decrepit manor house. Rich family takes in Canadian expat student and sort of envelops her into their life. There's crushes, there's big dinners. It's very wintry, definitely one to rereading on a rainy day or on a sort of cozy cottage vibe. I really love this one. I was very endeared to the characters a lot more than I thought I would. So that was a big thumbs up for me. I also finished on audio 1,000 Feasts, Small Moments in Joy, a memoir of sorts. This was Nigel Slater's latest book. It's felt a little bit like his publisher wanted him to write a book and this is what he did because he didn't have time to write a cookbook. Maybe that's a little cynical. My mum read this and really enjoyed it. It's small vignettes about various chances and times in Slater's career of cooking. That's very sort of travel log-ish. And I really enjoyed those moments. There's some beautiful, evocative stories of sort of his time in Lebanon and his time in Italy and like all these different places that he cooked and the people that he met. And he does seem genuinely like a generous and empathetic person who's invested in learning about the culture of the foods that he cooks. But it was pretty sparse, I would say. But I did enjoy it. I listened to it a lot when I was cooking, which was really nice. I think maybe I would have preferred to read it on audio. It did feel a little staggered, but simultaneously you could listen to like a couple of chunks and then put it down for a while and pick it back up, and it wasn't like you'd lost the plot or anything. So I enjoyed it for the most part. Then I read Couplets, a love story by Maggie Milner. My friend lent me this. It's one I've been on my TBR for ages. It's a beautiful cover, that's probably why. I didn't love this as much as I wanted to. It's a very long form, like prose poem about a queer love story. And I was discussing it over dinner with my friend where we sort of exchange books and talk about them, that we've read each other's books. And I just felt a little bit like this was, I just kept thinking when I was reading it, I wish this was a narrative story. How much better would this be, or how much more would I get out of this if this wasn't written in this couplet poem style? And that's just me, you know. I have a hard time with poetry. There's only a select number of poets who I will read and enjoy, and the rest I get easily cringed out, and I also just have that feeling of like I want more. I'm a greedy reader. I want more from the story, and often poetry is more sparse, which is, the whole point. So this isn't my critique of poetry in general, but just basically I thought I would love this a lot more than I did. A book I loved more than I thought I would was Korea, a New History of South and North. I finished this on the 11th of Jan. I really liked this, actually. I think it was a really accessible and interesting and not so dry history of the Korean Peninsula. It talked about sort of ancient, the empire, and then sort of the Korean War, occupation, invasion, and then the current status of both North and South Korea. And then quite a large chunk of the end is dedicated to activists and scholars and politicians who have focused on the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, which I did find really interesting and sort of positive is such a pathetic word to use, but I just found it hopeful, and I was interested to hear about people who are working on the ground towards these things. So I'd really recommend that one if you have any interest in Korean history. Then I read Thirst Trap by Granny O'Hare. This was a proof. I think it's out now. I really, really love this. This is an Irish novel about a group of friends, Maggie, Harley, and Russian, living in sort of like a crumbling house with various partners. They're all on different tracks and they're all approaching 30, and they're not really sure how their friendship will survive these diverting like life paths, and then, which is, a fairly typical story, but it did have also a lot about grief and sort of like friendship breakups and what you do with those unfinished endings. This is quite a severe unfinished ending about grief and loss, but I think it had a lot to say about friendships in your 20s, how you move forward, what you want out of these things, how do two people keep moving together and sort of give each other empathy and space and care. I think it had a lot to say about that and sort of like the current politics around friendship that we see in the mainstream about selfishness and showing up for one another. I really, really liked this. Then I read At the Table by Claire Powell, which is one in a series of books I've read in recent years, which appear to be fairly straightforward, and then they absolutely hit you with an emotional ton of bricks. Like, not in a, just in a way that I find quite shocking. Like, it's happened to me multiple times. I'll be reading what seems like a fairly typical family saga, millennial fiction, and then something horrific will happen, and then more tragedy, and I'm like, whoa, what? That wasn't what I was signing up for. I feel like they're misblurbed a lot of the time, but I did really like this. It just was like quite harrowing in places in a way that I don't think is marketed. It's set across 12, like a year with a family, but it mostly follows a sister and a brother, I think. If I'm remembering rightly, the death of one of their parents, them coming together and coming apart, and how they sort of like confront this grief. One of them was like dumped and is still not over the relationship. And it follows, these different family members, a lot of like gatherings around dinner tables and lunches. There's this one Mother's Day, was it a birthday lunch in a posh restaurant in Covent Garden, that's like one of those novel scenes that really sticks in my mind, and the scene from this book does, which is a good sign of a story. But yeah, I just wasn't prepared for how confronted I would be by this one. Then I listened to an audio, which I finished on the 23rd January. I read the most, it looks like. The Golden Mole and Other Living Treasure by Catherine Rundle. This is a book that my boyfriend put on his top 10 last year, so I gave it a go on audio, and I loved it. Catherine Rundle is an author I only know for her middle grade fiction that I used to have like when I was a teacher. So I wasn't familiar with this, and I did buy the copy for my boyfriend last year just because he loves moles. So I was like, give this a go. But it's really endearing. The audiobook, I think, is Stephen Fry. It's it's a voice that you will love. And it's all about sort of different animals that are astonishing or miraculous, and sort of living in these places, about migration and like the golden mole, and living outside of circumstances that are, you think an animal would survive. I'm sure it's trying to say something about society, but I just really enjoyed it for a book about animals on audio. Then I read The Museum of Lost and Fragile Things by Susan Johnson. I listened to this on audio as well. This was on the 2nd. Listened to a lot of audio in January because I was recovering from travel. This is a book about a cult, which is why I wanted to listen to it. It's set between Crewe up north in the 1980s and then down on the south coast, and it's about her parents who get involved in the Divine Mission. this sort of like guru leader from India who is sort of bringing together working class people in towns in the UK to sort of give up on materialism and believe in enlightenment. Kind of gives Wild Wild Country, what's his name, the Bhagwan, that kind of vibe basically. But it's really tragic because it's a lot about Suzanne's experience of neglect as a child, her parents sort of like being indoctrinated in this cult, her facing abuse and emotional neglect, and the difficulties and the shunning she experienced as a young person with like weirdo parents and how that manifests. But then she writes also in the present tense as an adult about putting together this exhibition with her daughter, and her mum is still in her life, and her mum and her dad both are very traumatized from their experience, and they both got out now, but they are sort of not fully invested in Suzanne as an adult either. And it's just really deeply sad. I didn't love the writing. I think the flitting between the past and the present is a hard like narrative style to tell in a way that feels memorable. And I didn't like often I think a reader will favor one over the other, and I did in this case. And I think, yeah, at its core, it's an interesting and sad story, but the execution wasn't exactly right for me. Then I read Hagstone by Sinead Gleason. I absolutely love this. This was like the first book since The Common Life Cycle of an Octopus. So like almost a month later where I was like, yes, this is what I want. I want to pick it up. I want to read it. I want to, while I'm waiting in the queue for a coffee, while I'm wake up in the morning, this is what I want to read. That feeling we're all seeking. This was that for me. And this is set on an island off the coast of Ireland about a young woman now who's an artist and sort of a bit of a hermit. She tries to make ends meet by doing sort of tours around the island, and then she tries to make her art and applies for grants. There's like some really interesting tidbits about like what it actually means to be a freelance artist in the UK and Arts Council funding and stuff, which I think is based on Gleason's experience, but I really liked. But now is commissioned by this group of women who live in a commune in like the most isolated part of the island. She's invited in selectively to come and see what they do and how they live. And these are all women who've left lives of trauma, who sort of sign away their possessions and their needs to live in what looks like quite a harmonious and beautiful life. But then sort of an outsider enters the island who's interested in the commune, and the stakes really raised from there. It gives Sarah Moss in terms of like creepy atmosphere that builds and builds. I absolutely loved this so much more than I thought it would. It has witchy folklore energy, culty energy, nuns. That it's a good vibe. It's such a good vibe. I love this. And then my partner listened to an audio and he loved it too, which was very affirming to me because it's not his type of book at all. But execution, brilliant. He said he listened on audio and he said the audio was brilliant too. So if you're looking for new audio, Hagstone's for you. Then I listened to The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie, and boy was it a ride. If you weren't invested in Ruby Frankie, Jodie Hildebrand, I'm sure lots of you have watched The Devil in the Family, which was the HBO Disney Plus documentary about the Frankie family, and I've been following this case because the Frankies are Mormon. I love to read about Mormons and watch content about Mormons. I have for years. And Ruby Frankie at one point was the most famous Mormon on the internet until she abused her kids. And this is from the oldest daughter's perspective, so she wasn't personally harmed in the instance with the younger Frankie children, but she's writing from the perspective of trying to save them, essentially, for as long as she's known that she was in danger. She's been trying to help her siblings escape. Fascinating, really well written actually. She credits a ghostwriter in the back, and I love that. I love when celebs or people of note credit the people they're working with. I thought the tone was brilliant. I thought it was very insightful and really quite moving in places, like beautifully written in places. Some really standout lines, and if you are at all invested in the case, I recommend listening to it. Then I read Breaststrokes by Margot Villeron, who is a writing friend of mine. This is her second novel. Her first novel was The Yellow Kitchen, which I absolutely adore. Need to reread that. This book is different in tone. It follows 4 different women across one Sunday. But 2 are sisters. So we hear from like 4 perspectives, but 2 stories are kind of like together. And it's all about how these different women's lives interact in different ways and overlap. And it has some brilliant scenes, which I think must be so difficult to write, about how you get these four people who don't know each other to cross over in ways that feel natural and make you have that uncanny feeling of it's such a small world. It wasn't my favorite novel compared to The Yellow Kitchen, but I did really enjoy the reading experience, and I definitely read it in a time where I was struggling to read consistently. So I will sort of note that, I finished that on Feb 14th. Then I listened to on audio The Baton and the Cross, Russia's Church Under Putin by Lucy Ash. This is where I enter quite a weird non-fiction phase, I think, in February. The depression was high, the chronic pain was high. I was looking for I couldn't settle, I would say. This was a period of not settling on my books. But this book was really good, niche, most definitely. It follows the Russian Orthodox Church from the Mongol Empire, or whatever state of the world that was, through to the Tsars, into Putin's Russia now. The author Lucy Ash has lived in Russia on and off for a long time, and she's has connections with people in the Russian Orthodox Church. It's a really interesting look at religion and dictatorship intertwined. Fascinating. It is quite dry in places about theology and the specifics of the Russian Orthodox Church, which might not interest you, but I think particularly that middle quarter where she does the 1980s into the 2010s, really, really interesting. A lot of political and social history entwined there in the religious history of the country. I also listened to Meltdown, Scandal, Sleaze, and the Collapse of Credit Suisse. This is when I really started getting into really quite dull audiobooks, that most people I think would find dull. Sort of white male billionaires and CEOs fucking up the world and their businesses is the category. This is about Credit Suisse, which is a bank in Switzerland that was very well known for sort of money, legal money laundering and all sorts of, high-powered clients, and keeping their money private in that weird World War II secrets act that they have that lets them to do all of these shady banking things. So it's about the buyout and how all these different people were inside knowing what was going to happen. It was all right. Didn't love it. Wasn't as groundbreaking and fascinating. One of those non-fiction books that I think I could have just read the article and that would have been enough. I did listen to an audio then, Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fito, who wrote Mrs. March, one of my favourite audiobooks of all time. One of my favourite books of all time, I would say. One I always suggest to people who want to be creeped out and kept on the edge of their seat and looking for something weird. And this is equally as weird, but it's set in a very different time period, not one I read of often. And it follows a house mistress who's a serial killer, basically. This is gruesome, so gruesome, in a way that I was meh. On audio, it's quite hard to skim over, and I am quite squeamish. And I also have a thing about listening or reading to books that are very body horror when I'm also unwell. And sometimes I kind of mess with my head a little bit. I don't really like to think about bodies being harmed anymore. Do you know what I mean? But I liked it more than I thought I would, because I really didn't think I would like it at all. So it's good, it's weird, it's short, so it makes for a good audiobook. It's really, really well narrated, actually, above and beyond standard, I would say. That was on Feb 25th. Then on March 1st, I finished listening to Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. Conversely, I think this book lost out to me because I listened to it. I think it would have been a better reading experience if I read it physically. I did have the physical book, but I was unwell at the time. This follows various teenage female boxers who are competing in regional competitions across the states. I wanted it to be Kick the Latch by Catherine Scallon, but this was a little bit more chaotic, I guess. We were following a lot of different perspectives. I wanted to love this a lot more than I did, but I did really like it. I liked the strange specificness of the lives of these girls who box, and sort of their other teenage coming of age feelings, relationships, competitiveness, jealousy, envy, all of these adolescent feelings that come up, I think were narrated really well. It has a quite repetitive, methodical nature to the storytelling, which I think sometimes I can find enjoyable and really rhythmic, but I think at points in this, which again was me, I think just the moment that I listened to it did start to grate on me, particularly on audio. But I liked the conversation around bodies and adolescence and sort of like that gangly Bambi type feeling you have as a teenage girl when your body's changing and you're not really sure what to do with it, paired with this like aggressive, violent sport. I liked that. I liked that a lot. But like I say, the execution wasn't quite there for me, but partly for the context of me listening to it. Then I finished, which I started, I think, a couple of weeks before, Maoism, A Global History by Julia Lovell. Oh yeah, this period of nonfiction was also when my insomnia was so bad, and I was like, you know, between the hours of like 2 and 6 a.m. I was fully awake. So I listened to like really dry audiobooks because I don't want to overstimulate my brain. I have to listen to something that's like vaguely interesting, otherwise I'll spiral. So it's a very specific category. And this was a book I listened to mostly in the night. But I really loved it, way more than I thought I was gonna. It was much less dry. I mean, it's still dry, don't get me wrong. This is like a fat centrist dad Christmas book. You're not just picking this up on holiday and reading it. Like it's 600 pages. The audiobook's over 20 hours. But I read it a lot quicker than I did, and I got a lot more out of it than I thought I would. It does what it says on the tin. It's a history of Maoism, but it's really a social and political history of all different countries that were attempting forms of resistance, socialism, communism in the last 20th century. So there's so much there to dig into. And once you find yourself getting a bit sick of a story or finding yourself less invested, you'll switch to another country for another part of history. So there was so much good stuff in there. And then Tom and I read The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity. Guys, I'm so tired. In the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer. We read this and then did like a mini book club on my Patreon. If you're new around here, I have a Patreon which has weekly audio newsletters where I talk about books, my feelings, disability justice, and then I do a monthly episode with my partner where we talk about books, politics, anything you want us to talk about. People seem to enjoy. So we read this and talked a lot about gifting, generosity, friendship, community, circular economy. There's so much in this book. It's a very little, like a short extended essay essentially, but Robin Wall Kimmerer is so smart but makes you feel so connected and not alone without being really like airy fairy about it. Like it's real, it's genuine, it's productive, it feels like empowering, which sounds kind of lame to say, but I really love her writing and I need to get it together and finish one of her full length books. But I really enjoyed it, would urge you to pick it up. Then I read Amma by Sarita de Silva. This, alongside Hagstone, definitely best novels I've read this year so far. This was Jess, if you're listening, one of my patrons, has been on at me to read this for ages, and it finally came up in my library and I absolutely loved it so much. So much. Intergenerational family saga, 3 women, Singapore, New Zealand, London, Malaysia, so many places, so many feelings, queerness, coming of age, violence, sort of family dynamics. There's just so much in here. It's perfect. I know, like, honestly, no notes. I thought it was so beautiful. I wish I could read it all over again. That's exactly the book I need right now in my life. So if anyone could tell me how to repeat that reading experience for the spring, let me know. That was Amma. Okay, back on to the weird middle of the night men messing up their lives. I listened to Gambling Man, the Wild Ride of Japan's Masayoshi Son. Masayoshi Son is a sort of effervescent figure in a lot of the big business. But if you read the WeWork book, if you were invested in that, if you've read any books sort of about the downfall of any tech business, Masayoshi Son's name appears. So I wanted to read his origin story, essentially. This is kind of a memoir, not a memoir, kind of a biography and kind of like a telling of his company. In places it's really interesting, particularly about his early childhood experiences of his family being Korean and living in Japan post-war, and sort of the difficulties and the experiences they have living in this slum and sort of being excluded from Japanese society, talking about like naming and I've forgotten all the words for everything right now. just essentially how they were discriminated against and how that led to a lot of young Korean men at that point in time starting their own businesses and being entrepreneurs because of being forced out of, or like locked out of, a lot of parts of society that they were being raised in. And then it, touches on sort of hyperglobalization, the tech boom, what? And the internet boom. The parts of it interesting. My economics A-level came in handy, I guess. But yeah, not one I'd write home about. Then I also listened to, I can see just 8 days later, I finished House of Huawei, The Secret History of China's Most Powerful Company. If you remember in the news, was it in 2021? Maybe a bit further back than that, but there was a big story in the global news where the boss of Huawei, so Huawei is a Chinese tech company, they make mobile phones, but they are mostly involved in like microchips and 5G. And if you ever read online about conspiracy theories, and anyone talking about sort of like the telephone waves are going to give us all cancer, you'll hear people talk about Huawei in quite a often xenophobic and anti-Chinese way. But anyway, in 2019, I think the daughter of the CEO, who was a big high-ranking member of the company, was arrested on quite strange charges when she was traveling through Canada and sort of reprimanded to the US. And I thought this was going to be like much more in detail about that. But really, it like goes quite far back into Huawei's history. Again, touching on similar topics to the Gambling Man book. It just wasn't as interesting as I hoped it was. It falls into that category of like books that I probably could have just read, which I did read the articles on at the time, and I could have just read an article. So was a little disappointed by that one, especially because it's authored by, I think, the Washington Post tech report, like the big tech reporter there. So I had high hopes. Okay, and then I can see on the same day I finished All Fours by Miranda July. This book was too long. 328 pages. It did not need to be that long. Halfway through, I was like, surely I'm near the end. No. I didn't love it. I don't love Miranda July's writing. I don't know why I thought I would love it. I guess I just fell into the trap of like everyone online talking about it, and I wanted to join in and give my opinion. And my opinion was I didn't really like it. Parts of it were very funny. It felt very American in like a cultural sense, which I find quite intriguing sometimes. It felt hyper online. Parts of it were funny, like I say, but it really dragged for me in the middle. I was like, yeah, man, let's get it together. Like I could have just stopped. I don't know why I didn't, and that's on me. So that's All Fours. Then I listened to on audio in April. We're into April. We're nearly there. I listened to Deep Cuts by Holly Brickley, and I really enjoyed this. Really well narrated, like above average narration quality, I would say. And it follows a young woman at uni who meets a guy who's making sort of indie music, and she thinks that he's going to be on the come up and sort of get famous, and she wants to help him as a friend, as a lover, who's to say. She starts essentially co-writing a lot of his work in an informal sense. It gets messy, he gets famous, she gets left behind, and the rest is history. I really was invested in her in quite a parasocial way, if we can call it that. I really liked this. It had propulsion, it had movement, it had emotional value and sort of like heightened emotional investment, but it didn't feel heavy. It flowed really nicely as an audiobook. No notes really, like I really, really liked it. An audiobook that did not flow so well for me was Seeing Other People by Diana Reid. Diana Reid wrote Love and Virtue, which is a book I loved when I read it. This was chaotic. So chaotic. So it follows two sisters. One's recently broken up with her boyfriend because she thinks that he slept with a sex worker. And her other sister is falling in love with her housemate, who's also a director because they both work in theatre, her director. And then there's some kind of switcheroo. It's so strange, and it's one of those millennial fiction books that I just don't really have the patience for anymore. I was just screaming at it, like, girls, get it together, please, for the love of God, get it together. It felt not unrealistic. It felt like, yeah, I could see this happening to my friends 10 years ago. I could see someone rocking up at the pub and telling me how XYZ, and now you've ended up with your sister's ex-boyfriend. I'll believe it, but it just didn't feel, I just didn't care. By the end, I was just so annoyed by them. And I have quite a high tolerance, and I find it frustrating when people constantly critique books with the message of like, oh, they were just so annoying. Like, I'm annoying. Everyone's annoying to the people in their lives. I don't think that's a good critique of a character. But I guess what I found, if I actually for a second use my brain and drill down to what is I found annoying, it's that I think that they were flattened to this drama in a way that made it unbelievable and sort of unrepresentative of who they were as people. I didn't think the character that Diana Reid had built them up to be in my head as the reader did not feel like the character that would do those things. Does that make sense? It felt incongruent, and therefore it felt like they were just doing it for the plot, not in the sense of like me in my real life, I'm doing something for the plot, but like the author was making the characters do things to move the plot along, and that felt frustrating to me. I would say I was into it for the first like 60%, and then that's when it got a bit more just wild, and I was like, nah, I need to tap out. But of course I finished it, and then I got annoyed about it, and here I am telling you. So what do you know? Okay, and the final book I finished, which was at this point a few weeks ago, A Separation by Katie Kitamura. This is Katie Kitamura's first book, and the reason I started reading this, and also this is a list of books that I finished. There's a lot of books I did not finish this year so far. Maybe I'll make that a video if you want to see it. But I could make a video about it, but most of my answers to why I didn't finish it would boil down to be like, I was depressed, I was unwell, the book wasn't clicking for external C reason A and B. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think many of them were the book's fault. A Separation, Katie Kitamura's debut novel. Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. Again, an all-time classic favourite book of mine. She writes tension, she writes drama, she writes between the lines in the silences so well. And this book is no exception. Follows a woman who goes to Greece to look for her husband, who should be her ex-husband, but they didn't file the divorce papers, who's gone missing in a random enclave on a Greek island where there's been a recent devastating forest fires. Enter the mother-in-law. So the son, the husband's mother, phones to say, have you heard from him? Where is he? She has to play along. What do you know? She ends up in the same hotel as him, looking for him, and he's nowhere to be found. It's not a mystery per se. Katie Kitamura doesn't really write in the sense of a specific genre. She writes literary fiction with propulsive plots, I would say. This was so good. I loved it. It's easy reading, but it's smart. It's so clever, and she writes, no word is wasted with Kitamura. She's so precise, and these characters are so well formed. You could feel the crackle between like the dinner scene where the wife is having dinner with someone she thinks her husband slept with before he went missing, and they're eating this like bland hotel dinner in an empty restaurant on the terrace where the waiters are pretending that they don't know what's going on. Like it sizzles with atmosphere in a way that I just find so impeccable to read. I loved it. I felt so transported to off-season Greek island devastated by forest fires. It has some... Katie Kitamura also brings in these really interesting sort of like moments of cultural interest. Like in this book, there's a sideline story about the Weepers, which are this history of Greek religious women who attend funerals to publicly mourn. And in Intimacies, her other novel, it's set around the court in The Hague, the ICC, and we sort of have these, our main characters are translators, so we're hearing a lot about sort of war crimes. And yeah, she really pulls in these specific moments and these, you know, I don't even know what the word is for them, but it's like talking to a wider thing outside of just the novel and the characters and the people and the small family dynamic or the interpersonal relationships, but it's not in a way of feeling like moralistic or prescriptive. I will say the reason why I started to read A Separation is because I tried to read Audition, which is her latest book, and I found it completely impenetrable. Please tell me if you completed that book. I felt very affirmed the other day because I saw a meme someone posted, like the Spider-Man thing of like you and your friends discussing what actually happened in Audition, because it seems like a lot of people didn't get it. I don't know if it's one of those books that, like, you know, I'll put my hands up, maybe I'm too small pea brain for it, which is fine. My partner also tried to read it and he was like, no, not getting anything. And from the reviews I've seen online, people have said it's a really big pivot from these two books, which is fine. Do your thing, Kids Amora. I'm happy for you. But for now, I was just happy to return to her writing that I know and love. And I recommend A Separation, especially for an upcoming Northern Hemisphere summer that you're looking for. It will be good. So those are the 25 books I've read. I feel like we got through them quite quickly. Let me know if any of these are a standout to you. Like I say, not a ton that I would stand out. A Separation, Deep Cuts, Amma, and Hagstone are the top 4 novels, I would say, that you should read from this list. Let me know if you've read any of them. Let me know any favourite, anything that's coming up, and fingers crossed that my next quarter of reading will be a little bit more successful and sort of smooth. I'll see you again for something bookish soon. Bye.